Hello everyone, I'm Elfowls, and welcome to my coverage of Season 12 of the Wooper Club League, where I will once again be coaching the Newport Noctiles. This season is our first of Gen 9, with Scarlet and Violet just being released a few months ago, so of course we have a bunch of changes to consider with the generation, as well as our own drafting process as a league. With Gen 9 being so new, we can't figure out the viability of every pick very accurately, so for this season we're forgoing our regular point-buy system and just going with a free draft, so my picks here are only limited by what got drafted before my turns. Terrestrialization was also a consideration for the season, and it was decided that it's allowed, with the exception of a few specific top-tier Pokemon that would just become too strong with that option available. Having so many Terra options could make team building a lot more volatile, but we wanted to have at least one season to experiment with the mechanic relatively unrestricted, and it does sound like a lot of fun. Now, we're just going to get right into the draft. The league has already gotten so big that with the smaller number of Pokemon available, it made more sense to split up into two conferences of 9 people each. Yes, 18 total. We're growing a lot. Where the draft and regular seasons they're going to be completely separate up until the finals, where the winners of each conference will meet, I believe. I was placed into the Paldean Wooper Conference, as opposed to the Johto Wooper Conference, where I think that worked out pretty fine for me. With 3 of the 4 coaches I'm generally most threatened by ending up in the opposite conference from me. That said though, it's an entirely new generation with new mechanics, and the league is full of very skilled players anyway, so there's no telling who's going to be on top. Within the Paldean Conference, I got the 4th pick out of 9, which is earlier in the draft than I'm used to. So for my first pick, I had some very good options to choose from. My original choice, Chi-Yu, was unfortunately taken before I could get to it, so that left a few options to consider. The fast top tiers of Qianpao and Iron Valiant were both available and tempting in a metagame that's a bit lacking in these faster threats, but I wanted to pick that's able to terrestrialize, which aren't allowed on these two, and I also wanted to build up a bulkier backbone to start off the team. So both of those factors led me to choose Great Tusk, the past Paradox form of Donphan and a really good generalist Pokemon. Just to start, those stats, man. Great Tusk has an amazing base 131 attack, combined with great HP and defense with meh special defense that's not as bad as you might think considering the high HP. You could make an Assault Vest build to kind of help with that. 87 base speed is also really nice for a Pokemon like this. That is surprisingly high for such a tank. And those stats combined with its unique typing mean that Great Tusk can switch in onto a lot of different physical attackers and then go to town with whatever it feels like. For moves, it has the unique Headlong Rush, which is really good ground-type close combat, as well as Earthquake if it wants the alternative option. It has close combat as well as a very strong body press, and coverage and support like Ice Spinner, Mega Horn, Play Rough, Iron Head, and Heavy Slam, the Elemental Fangs, Bulk Up for a potential setup, Taunt, and the now rare Knockoff. This also gives us our first potential Hazard Setter and Remover with both Stealth Rock and Rapid Spin, as well as the ability to threaten a lot of spin blockers with just its stabs and knockoff. There are some weaknesses here that we'll have to work on, that low special defense as well as tough weaknesses to Ice, Fairy, and Water, among others, but this thing is one of the most used Pokemon in OU for a reason. Just a behemoth that's extremely hard to 1-hit KO while handing out a bunch of 1-hit KOs itself. And that's before talking about terrestrializing, which it can do effectively. I see it mostly choosing one of its existing types to push its stab moves over the top, but we could also go for some defensive mix-ups to patch up some of those weaknesses. This is just a pickup that allows us to branch out into both offense and defense in the upcoming rounds, just being so easy to build around. With that said, I wanted to prioritize picking up a fast attacker from the higher tiers and something with good special stats to complement Great Tusk's physical stat spread. That led me to Iron Moth, another Paradox Pokemon and the future form Volcarona. Iron Moth's Fire Poison typing does introduce a nasty quad weakness to ground, and unfortunately stacks weaknesses to water and psychic, but offensively, the Moth is a great complement to Great Tusk. Breaking through those bulky grass types and the bulky fairies, this thing is one of the best fairy killers in the game, so it breaks through those that would otherwise threaten Great Tusk quite a bit. Other than that, it's a basic but very good special attacker with 110 base speed and a crazy base 140 in special attack, along with plenty of move options in its choice of fire stabs, which includes the Great Fiery Dance, as well as coverage like Sludge Wave as stab, Energy Ball, Discharge, Dazzling Gleam, Psychic, Hurricane, U-Turn to make for a good pivot, Morning Sun for reliable recovery, Agility as our main setup option, and Toxic Spikes to make this our second Hazard Setter to start off the draft. I really like this. It's a big moveset upgrade over Volcarona in my opinion, outside of the loss of Quiver Dance. It's just so much coverage and utility, and I really do like how good we are at the hazard play to start off. already being able to set 2 different hazards with one of the best rapid spinners in the format, as well as a grounded poison type to absorb opposing toxic spikes. Iron Moth is also a pretty good Terra candidate, with some of the most common options being things like Grass and Fairy to boost its coverage moves while changing its defensive profile in order to keep the sweep going. All these sets look diverse, but for now just picture a boot special attacker with U-turn or hazard setting, or an agility sweeper that boosts its special attack with either a cheeky booster energy or something like a fiery dance proc. Both those sets look so good just for general use and for sweeping, especially next to a reliable bulky attacker to pivot into. Great Tusk and Iron Moth both look very fun to use, and it feels like they're going to complement each other really well, so I'm glad to have both of them to start. Moving along, I mentioned that my first 2 picks stacked up on water and psychic weaknesses, and the ground type is also kind of a weakness right now, so we're going to go with a familiar face in Hydreigon, a mon that I relied on a ton when I used it in Season 8. This is another Pokemon that just kind of does it all, with great bulk, great special attack, and a speed stat of 98 that pretty much splits the difference between Great Tusk and Iron Moth right down the middle to start off a pretty good speed ladder. I will admit that in Gen 9, Hydreigon's kind of pigeonholed into offensive roles more often, as opposed to defensive ones, since it did lose Roost in the generational shift, but it still has a ton of variety. Choice item sets are always viable, as well as mixed attacking options and the new potential of... Nasty Plot's not new. It has the potential of Nasty Plot to really break things down. Its attacking options are even more diverse than my first 2 picks, with Draco Meteor and Dragon Pulse, Dark Pulse, as of course it stabs, coverage like Earth Power, Flash Cannon, Fire Blast, and Flamethrower, Focus Blast despite losing superpower, plenty of rock coverage, Surf and Hydro Pump, and U-turn to make for another great pivot. Not to mention Taunt, and for some reason, Stealth Rock. I have no idea why they gave this thing rocks for this generation, but I guess I'm not complaining. All those options also make Hydreigon into a premier Terra candidate for my team, either boosting one of its potential coverage options or changing type to get rid of its crippling fairy weakness while taking advantage of Levitate to make for a great defensive profile no matter which type we choose. Hydreigon looks as diverse as ever and finishes off a diverse and powerful top 3 that could be a nightmare to handle. With Great Tusk and 2 big attackers out of the way, I felt like it was time to start bulking up this team a little more, so my next pick, while not quite slowing down the offense, is the Water and Fairy type Azumarill, which looks really good in this metagame. And not because of its offensive potential with huge power, which it does have, but because of its defensive profile with an amazing type combination and good bulk all around. There are a lot of good dark types running around in this metagame, with supplementary coverage typings like Ice, Fire, and Dragon, all of which are checked really well by Azumarill. It's also a great bulky resist to fighting, which was only resisted by the frail Iron Moth so far. So we can run sets like Assault Vest or Physically Defensive to take hits for the rest of the team, with an uninvested attack stat still hitting back really hard thanks to huge power. And any given week, if the matchup calls for it, we could just go all-out offense, with a classic Choice Band and Belly Drum sets to work with. The coverage isn't that great, but we still hit hard with moves like Liquidation, Priority Aqua Jet, Play Rough, Ice Spinner, Superpower, Bulldoze, and Trailblaze as fun options. Azumarill is one Pokemon that I probably won't want to Terra, since its natural dual typing is already so good to complement what the rest of my team is doing. With my 5th pick, I wanted to keep building on the bulky side of my team and take pressure off a couple different mons trying to fill certain roles. It's also about time for me to grab a Steel type, and with Scizor already drafted in round 2, I picked Forretrace to finish off my Dragon Fairy Steel core with Hydreigon and Azumarill, while also taking pressure off of Great Tusk to sponge physical hits while also getting up and removing hazards. Forretrace gets access to all of Stealth Rock, Spikes, Toxic Spikes, and Rapid Spin, opening up hazard stack strategies for us as well as a second remover. It also gets Volt Switch to be a good slow pivot, so hopefully we can use this as a way to sponge a hit and then reset tempo in our favor. Between the options I listed just now and a slow Gyro Ball, those are probably the main moves we're going to be clicking, but it does get a strong body press, gets Earthquake and Bulldoze, Rock Tomb, Seed Bomb, and Ice Spinner if we're really looking for coverage options. As for abilities, I think both are quite useful, with Sturdy allowing us to always get something done from full health, and Overcoat helping out against Spore users, making us a more complete check to most grass types. Forretrace isn't really anything too exciting, but especially for round 5, it's a serviceable Steel type that I'm happy to have on the team. Keeping up with the physical bulk, my 6th team member is going to be Dondozo, a water type with a massive 150 base HP, as well as 115 defense and 65 special defense. This might seem like a weird pick at first, since it overlaps a bit with Great Tusk and Fortress in stat spread, and Azumarill in typing, but I do think Dondozo brings some new things to the table. All three Pokemon I just mentioned can be prone to getting worn down or getting set up on if they're running defensive, and Dondozo hopefully solves those problems with sheer bulk on a Rest Talk set that heals itself and Unaware to stop those setup sweepers in their tracks. By this round, I had noticed that a lot of my competitors were starting to draft several physical setup sweepers, so I wanted to have a stop to those, and Dondozo looked like the best one. A physically defensive set will take more hits than you're expecting it to, while especially a defensive set with Curse can get scary really quick setting up. That base 100 attack stat really isn't bad. Any set can also run Oblivious to stop Taunt, or Water Veil if I'm more concerned about getting burned, but to be clear, Unaware is the main reason I drafted this. And while it is weird to stack up on 2 water types so early, I think I'm okay with it. We don't have any other electric weaknesses, and every other Pokemon on my team resists grass. Dondozo is also a pretty good Terra candidate, it's changing up its weaknesses. So the way I see it, Azumarill and Dondozo can sort of sub in for each other, depending on what I need for their water type role, or there are probably weeks I could bring both to a game where water types look particularly good for the matchup. So, for a few rounds now, I had been drafting up water resistances to support my top 2 picks of Great Tusk and Iron Moth, but at this point I wanted something that really put pressure on those water types, making sure they're not super threatening to my team. No option looked better than the offensive Rotom-Mow, which is not only resistant to water but also immune to ground as extra support for Iron Moth, and it in fact completes the classic Fire, Water, Grass core along with Iron Moth and either one of Azu or Dondozo. Rotom-Mow is most commonly known for having a near unblockable Volt Switch, since the ground types that would block it won't try to out of fear of getting blown back by a Stab Leaf Storm. That's the main idea, a pivot that pressures those grass and ground types for the rest of the team, while also tacking on extra utility in the form of Will-O-Wisp, Thunderwave, Trick, and Dual Screens, among other things. You know, Rotom things. A solid pickup for sure. With those first 7 picks out of the way, we've got our primary selection of Pokemon, and from here we're still trying to just fill any holes the team might have. This is kind of the point in the draft where the high tiers are more or less picked over, leaving us to find value in the lower tiers where we can. Looking at the team, I am liking it so far, but our fastest Pokemon is Iron Moth at 110 base speed, which I don't love. We don't want other fast threats to outspeed our whole team for free. So to break up speed tiers at the top, there weren't too many options, but I picked up Kilowattrel in round 8. And while this pick is mostly meant to keep faster threats in check, we can definitely get some utility out of the bird as well. The abilities are the first thing to note here. Volt Absorb looks like the most useful as a second electric immunity for the team, but Competitive also looks super interesting as a way to punish Defog with a +2 special attack boost, since until now we didn't have any deterrent to hazard removal. Wind Power is also kind of interesting, with the most notable application being its synergy with Kilowattrel's ability to set Tailwind for itself. I don't usually think Tailwind is worth it for singles, but with the charge boost, maybe. We'll see. But apart from the interesting abilities, this is just a fast special attacker with access to stabs in Volt Switch, Thunderbolt, Air Slash, and Hurricane, as well as U-Turn and Weather Ball. Yeah, not really much coverage, but the flying type offense and base 125 speed are really what set this thing apart from what the rest of my team is doing. Like I said before, we're mostly just looking for extra utility out of our last picks, and what does that better than Klefki? This really is a pure utility mon, and with a great defensive typing, Prankster, and a giant support move pool to pull from, including Thunder Wave to stop sweepers in their tracks, Reflect and Light Screen, Spikes, Sunny Day and Rain Dance for a couple of potential abusers that we have, and even Switcheroo, all with +1 priority. Typing-wise, Klefki doesn't bring too much to the table that I didn't already have, but it is notably the first bulky resist to flying that the team has, something that was actually kind of lacking up until now. Now, we're kind of moving fast here. We're at the second to last pick, and I just don't really think I need anything else for the team at this point. But my team was looking a little light on ghost resists, so I made the fun pickup of Farigiraf, which adds a ghost immunity that isn't weak to fighting, a fairly rare combination of traits. There are a couple big offensive ghosts drafted by some of my opponents that will need specific coverage to hit this hard, since Farigiraf actually has pretty serviceable bulk with a base 120 HP stat. It can use its defensive profile to be a decent pivot with both Wish and a slow baton pass, but don't sleep on it offensively. It actually gets access to several setup moves with Agility, Calm Mind, and even Nasty Plot, with a solid base 110 special attack and access to stabs with Psychic, Twin Beam, Stored Power, and Hyper Voice, as well as kind of a lot of coverage with Dazzling Gleam, Energy Ball, Shadow Ball and Thunderbolt, as well as Earthquake off that base 90 attack. Its abilities are pretty cool too, with Armor Tail for an immunity to priority on, I guess, agility sets, Sap Sipper for a grass immunity, or Kudzu, which might actually make it pretty hard to take down if it's holding a Citrus Berry. This is really just a Pokemon that I thought would be fun to have on the team, but I think it can do some stuff. Very excited to use Fergaraf. Going into the last round, I really, I made the fun pickup of Fergaraf already. I really didn't have anything left I needed to do with this team. But I noticed there was one Pokemon left undrafted from the higher tiers. It did have a decent amount of overlap with the rest of my team, but like I said, I don't have anything else to do right now. The lower tiers don't have much to offer, so I went with Tyranitar for pick number 11. Like I said, there's a lot of overlap here. It's a bulky physical powerhouse like Great Tusk and Azumarill. It's a dark type like Hydreigon, but it does actually help with a few aspects of my draft. The biggest gap it closes is that of a specially defensive tank, with Sandstream to buff up that stat and support the rest of my physically bulky team. It's also another bulky resist to Ghost and Flying, which I kind of needed, but most importantly, you can't argue with the stats and move pool of a pseudo-legendary as a last round pick. Tyranitar, of course, has plenty of coverage options with Rock Stabs, Crunch, the Elemental Punches, Earthquake, Body Press, and Outrage for the physical side, and off of its base 95 special attack, it can fire off Ice Beam, Flamethrower, Thunderbolt, and Hydro Pump, among other things. That's just so much type coverage. Tyranitar can definitely benefit from terastallizing out of its fighting weakness, although that could be a bit counterproductive with its ability, but either way, the versatility is amazing. This is another Rock Setter, a Wall, a bulky Sweeper with Dragon Dance, or just a brutally powerful Choice Band Wall Breaker that will always force prep for my opponent, and I can't ask for much more out of a last round pick. So, that's the draft, and I am pretty happy with how things turned out. I have a few stats up here, but I won't be going through all of them in depth. I'll just focus on a few. We have 16 of the 18 types represented on our team, with only Ghost and Ice missing. I do think I will miss having a Spin Blocker, but other than that, I don't think these are huge gaps. We have 6 pivots that should keep momentum in our favor, 6 hazard setters, and only 2 removers. That number does seem like a bit low, but I think removal is a little hard to find right now anyway, so it might just be par for the course when compared to other teams, and I think our removers are very good. As for the speed tiers, I think we built a pretty good set of steps from Kilowattrel at 125 all the way down to Dondozo at 35. The biggest gap is actually at the top with 15 points down from Kilowattrel to Iron Moth, and there's another big gap between Klefki and Tyranitar with 14 points, but honestly, if those are the worst gaps I have, then I'm not too concerned. We'll hopefully be forcing a lot of uncomfortable speed creeps from our opponents if they want to stay ahead. And that'll wrap up my draft summary. I will hopefully be putting videos together for my whole season, and I know I do say that every time before falling off of it at some point, but I'll actually try to make that true this time. With that said, thank you so much for watching. Check out the Wooper Club League channel in the description, and join me next time for Week 1 of Season 12. See you then!